Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Christina Furtado, and I am the Mental Health and Wellness Specialist for guard.meCARES. Now, before we get started, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I do wish to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands, which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and sacred territories of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation peoples. Do join me in a moment just to reflect, to acknowledge the harms and the mistakes of the past, and to consider how we can and should each in our own way try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Now, today is a different conversation than we've had in the past. It is about the unspoken stories of all heroes. In observance of Remembrance Day and Veterans Day, we are honored to welcome a panel of service members to start a very important conversation. A conversation that's centered around their experiences and the experience of others, to really look at the dedication of their lives to serve their countries. Now, with an estimated Canadian veteran population of 629,300 and around 19 million veterans in the US, our hopes with today's discussion is to provide insight towards how we can all do our part to ensure that our veterans don't have to face the toughest battle of their lives alone. Now, it is with great appreciation and gratitude that I do introduce today's panelists. Hello, everyone, and thank you again for your time and your service. Now, on the screen here, we have, I just can't even put together the number of years and dedication of our panelists. And I don't want to, not do any justice to what they've done in their lives and their careers. So I will do the best that I can to really capture exactly what they have done and what they continue to do moving forward to best support their brothers and sisters, as well as their community members. So we have Robert Wilcox, Sean Wilcox. Chief Petty Officer Wilcox was born in Edmonton, Alberta. He enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in October of 1994 as an armored crewman. Now, upon graduating basic training in Saint-Jean and completing qualifying level 3 in battle school in Gagetown, he was posted to the Lord Strathconus Horse in Calgary. Now, Chief Petty Officer has had a well-rounded career path that has taken him in many different directions across many different lands. One, in 1996, he was deployed to Bosnia. And again, the story can go on. His story is very just unbelievable. And I will leave it to him to continue to share that amongst his own platforms. Now, Chief Petty Officer, though, was appointed to his current position as the Canadian Forces Training Deployment Development Center Sergeant, Major, in July 2020. Chief Petty Officer Wilcox holds a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology from Concordia University, a Master's of Arts in International and Political Leadership from Royal Roads University. He was also awarded the Royal Roads Founders Award for his advanced work in the field of gender integration and leadership. Chief Petty Officer Wilcox was sponsored by the government of Ecuador to develop a national action plan to integrate women into their military and government organizations, and has since developed and implemented a gender-specific mentorship program for women of the Canadian Forces. He continues to work closely with the Canadian Armed Forces Champion of Women to ensure his program is available across the Canadian Forces. So with that, Sean, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I think it's a very important thing we're doing today.
As do I. Thank you. We also have Ashley Forsyth. So Ashley was born in Kingston, Ontario, while she joined the Naval Reserves at Her Majesty Ketquati. I know I totally chopped that name.
Cataraqui.
Thank you. There's no way that I would have gotten that around. So thank you. She worked on the West Coast and completed training on the East Coast. After 5 years of balancing various military contracts, she took a break to study adventure tourism in British Columbia and went on to complete a bachelor's degree in psychology. After completing a master's degree that looked at adventure training for veterans, Ashley worked in clinical research in psychiatry, but once again felt the call to go back to school. She is currently a third-year PhD student with the Center of Neuroscience Studies at Queen's University, studying programming for military, veterans, and public safety personnel with PTSD. Leaving the military was a tough decision for Ashley. She struggled with losing her military family and finding a place in the civilian world. However, she has always knew that she was not done and wanted to someday be able to give back to her community. Over the years, she has dedicated not only her studies to the military, but also volunteers with veteran support organizations whenever possible. So Ashley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be invited.
We also have the pleasure of inviting Chris Jacomac, and I do hope I got the name correct. Yeah, okay. So Chris is a retired United States Air Force non-commissioned officer. Over the course of his 20-year career, he served in multiple military leadership roles in Nevada, Germany, and Korea, and is a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. He was named the Air Combat Command First Sergeant of the Year in 2016 and was a distinguished graduate at every level of Air Force enlisted professional military education. In July 2017, he lost his brother to suicide after a courageous battle with post-traumatic stress. As a wounded warrior himself, Jacomac dedicates his life to finding and utilizing multiple pathways to recovery from mental health issues, grief, and trauma. Chris is a War Games athlete, as well as a distinguished member of the Governors and Mayors Challenge teams in Nevada and Las Vegas. So Chris, welcome.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. It's an honor to be talking to my brothers and sisters to the north. I think maybe the only thing we'll disagree on today is who's going to win the Stanley Cup this year.
Oh, you're poking the bear there. But jokes aside, it is an important conversation. And as I've already started by saying how appreciative and grateful I am, not only to your service, but joining us today. It truly will capture much of what needs to be said in a way that has not been told. So for that, I'm truly thankful. Now, with all that said, on an annual basis, the 11th of November is a day of remembrance. It's a day that we honor the brave, the selfless, the devoted service members who fought for and gave the ultimate sacrifice for their country. This devotion, though, is not without struggle. Most of what we discussed during our Real Talk series is around mental health. It's around mental illness, and today is no different. Our Real Talk lives are about continuing the conversation beyond those annual dedicated days. It's about actionable steps forward in reducing stigma, about promoting understanding and awareness around issues that impact us all, whether it be directly or indirectly. It is not only their fight to fight. Mental illness affects people of all ages, education, income levels, and even cultures. Additionally, it states really that mental health illness indirectly affects many Canadians at some time through family members, through friends, maybe even colleagues. It affects us all in some way. The more that we have these conversations and the more that we bring to life the experiences to help tell those stories, it gives us the opportunity to reflect. It gives us the insight to choose. What are we committed to? Well, I, for one, am committed to actionable steps moving forward, to breaking down the stigma, to building awareness and educating people on what they themselves can do. Today's just that first day for you. Now, as I've mentioned, other Real Talks have been sort of along the lines of mental health and various mental illnesses. I'd like to sort of pose and start the conversation. So, Chris, I'm going to start with you. Why do you think that mental health in general is important to veterans and the military?
Oh, that's a very strong question there, Christina, that can be taken many ways. Is it really depends on the capacity that you're in. It's like, we look at a lot of physical readiness in the military. You talk about that you need to be physically sharp to be able to accomplish the mission. We see it glamorized through American film and movies as basic training, everything like these gung-ho physical specimens that are out there. And we attune to that. But your brain has to be just as sharp as your physical capacity, because when actually everything starts happening and the stress of whether it be a home station mission comes in or serving your country overseas, is your brain has to be sharp to make the right decisions out there, because you are going into some very significant challenges with it. Is military life is very stressful. And if your mind is sharp, you're able to make more rational decisions on what's going to be best for your brothers and sisters in arms and what's going to be part of the national strategy there. So a lot of it comes down to is like, focus on your mind. Mental health equals physical health, as you'll hear a lot of people that will discuss out there. If your brain is not sharp, then how can your body be sharp to be able to accomplish it? And there's, we get so wrapped up in mental health just being talk therapy and medication, everything like that. But, mental health can actually be part of just moving your body for 30 minutes a day, having a good conversation, speaking to a peer that will actually listen to you and support your needs and your wants. Both the positive when you're really succeeding, but maybe when you're going through a difficult time as well too, to be able to socialize and talk through things. So it's really this multifaceted issue that comes together. And for the general population is we tend to just view it as this, okay, mental health is I go see a therapist, I get some medication, I talk through therapy. But holistically, it's so much more than that. It encompasses relationships, it encompasses everything. It encompasses the environment that you're in. It encompasses your social sphere, or in some aspects there's your tribe, is what part of your tribe and where you fit in. So really it's more than just this simple topic.
And you bring up some valuable points as you were sharing that. So thank you, because it is something that we, you mentioned about glorifying, and I may be misquoting what you said. So I do simply apologize. It's my interpretation of what you said, is that we glorify the experiences of our service personnel. We think about, even in our title, if you think about the Unspoken Stories of Heroes, we glorify the experience. And while we tend to not take a step back and look at even the impact of some of the language that we're using in, introducing or explaining the experiences, that can also contribute to the barriers of openly speaking about challenges or openly speaking about mental health. And the term mental health is so openly used now. And though it needs to sort of take a step forward towards what does that actually mean? And you bring up a lot of different examples of what it can mean outside of the box of how we've packaged it over the last couple of years. So, Ashley, what do you think with regards to the importance of mental health for veterans in the military?
I think Chris did a really good job summarizing some of the major issues. And he touched on talking about physical health as well. And what we know with people who have mental health problems in the military, be that depression, anxiety, PTSD, etc., there's also an increase in physical health problems that are associated with that. So that can be anything from cardiovascular disease to different types of cancers, autoimmune diseases, etc. So what this can result in is not only an individual being non-operational within their unit or within the military, but often they'll have to leave the military. So a career can be finished, you can be medically released from it. So it's really important that it be addressed at all levels in the military, from the day that you join basic training, which really sets the tone for how you're going to address mental health in your military career, but also when you're leaving, because you may only be 25 when you're leaving the military. You've got a whole lifetime of a career ahead of you. We also know that many people, when they leave the military, seek second service jobs. So go into things like firefighting or policing and that kind of thing. And these organizations may have different approaches to mental health. So if you're carrying those with you to these new jobs, they carry the very similar types of risks to your mental health. So having that awareness and what resources are available for you are extremely important.
Thank you. And that, again, it's not just about the individual taking on responsibility and duty for their own care, but it is looking at sort of the circle of care around them with regards to their experiences, whether they are actively involved within service or on their pathway home and their reintegration into civilian life. It is we need to look at all the various layers of what it actually means and how their experiences have impacted their mental health. And that sort of highlights really, again, that importance piece of what that may look like. So Sean, I defer now to you and what you think about that question and moving forward.
I think both Chris and Ashley hit the nail on the head, but if we back up a little bit and look at it as from maybe a systems perspective or something, or we break down the role of the military in a draconian style. We are employed to apply force on behalf of the elected government, right? And we spend much of our time training our individuals physically, like Chris said, and we'll spend millions of dollars training an individual, developing skill sets on how to fire a service rifle. But at what point do we need to look at investing into our most complex weapon system, which is the human being, right? And this is the kind of thing that we've fallen short on for a long time. And we need to invest in that because the machine or the organization will not move forward if we are not firing, physically as well as mentally. And we're seeing that right now, that our numbers in the CAF right now for mental health issues are higher than they've ever been. And we've been out of a conflict for 12 years now, I believe. And then, COVID has developed more mental health issues than Afghanistan did, right? Because we've told our members, you're no longer part of the team, stay at home. And the people who've joined the service, that is what they joined to do, and they need that piece, right? So it's extremely important. We're in a reconstitution period right now to bring the machine back up to running speed. And if we don't address mental health, we're not going to get there, right? So I think that's what we need to do.
And I think that a lot of other sectors and a lot of other individuals are experiencing a similar thing, not to the same degree. And though, in a lot of other sectors, we have seen a hike as well in mental health issues with regards to, that limited social connectivity that our in-person experiences have gifted us with. And we know that from a military standpoint, that and I'm going to say the name wrong, camaraderie. Ashley, don't laugh at me. I told you.
Camaraderie.
Thank you. I already told you I'm going to have issues getting my words out. But it is that sense of, having that support, having that family that's not blood related, but that is experience related, that you can go to, that that their perspective can be similar to yours because of that shared experience. And we see that through a lot of other sectors that have also seen a significant impact. Now that sort of takes us back to, that similar experience of stigma and the barriers towards mental health support. And while, service personnel have their own inherited challenges, given what their career path has been, it doesn't lessen the fact that stigma exists, and it doesn't lessen the impact that we can all make by having those conversations at the forefront from the get-go, in sharing what our experiences are, our challenges, but also it's not just you, right? And having that type of dialogue. It's okay to not be okay, regardless of what role you carry and what that sort of may look like. Now, with all that said, what can be done by the armed forces community, in addition to us civilian community, to change that conversation around mental health? So Robert, I know you just sort of ended off with us, so I will sort of lead the way, please, in this next question.
Absolutely. So looking forward to mental health within the Canadian Armed Forces anyways, as everybody's aware, we have a new Minister of National Defense. And the minister has straight out said that her priority one for the organization is mental health. That will be moving forward for the the organization. A big piece we're running into, it's for the CAF itself, is resources. Right? We do not have the resources in the organization, and we're having to push a lot of our people outside to other organizations, and they're running into massive wait times, years and years before. And as you're well aware, mental health, we don't have that timeline to work with, right? That kind of thing needs to be addressed right away. If you look at it from inside, who's not a mental health professional, from the leadership side of the house, I expect my leadership to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. Traditionally, we are not comfortable having these difficult conversations. And mental health from my generation, when I joined the forces, was very much, it was stigmatized. It was, let's not talk about it. But that has changed over time. Mm-hmm. But the stigma has started to fall away. But what we need to understand is now, how do we address it from a leadership perspective? How do we support our young people and the people doing the job? And that training, we're working on it, but we're not where we need to be. So it's a work in progress.
And fair enough. As I said, like we've had how many years now where mental health has been brought to the forefront of so many different initiatives, strategies, various sectors, again, in really identifying the impact that one's mental health has on what we do and the career paths we have, whether we are sitting behind a desk or whether we're in front lines. Our minds and our bodies have to work together, not against each other, in order to actively and effectively fulfill our obligations within that role. So breaking down again that stigma and working towards a more open and honest conversation around those experiences is definitely going to help us achieve that. And though it's a long process for sure. So Ashley, what do you think can be done to help that conversation?
Yeah. So speaking to what Sean was talking about with having these uncomfortable conversations. So the Canadian military, I can't speak for the US, has done a great deal in the last 10, 15 years to combat stigma. There's tons of programs available, and that conversation has really changed. And that type of stigma is called public stigma. And that's how we feel about other people. So we'll be absolutely supportive if somebody needs an afternoon, a week, a month, a year to go and get the services that they need. On the other side of that is called self-stigma. And that's where we're really hung up. And that as service people, we hold ourselves to this degree and this higher standard that is actually really unattainable in most cases. And so when somebody else is seeking service, we're like, that's great for you, but maybe I'm not feeling worthy of going to get that type of treatment, or I'm stigmatizing myself. I should have been stronger. I shouldn't have reacted this way. So that type of conversation, that's going to be a really difficult one for us moving forward in the CAF. And the other one, talking about stigma, is changing our understanding of what a traumatic experience, like we'll use PTSD for an example, actually looks like. So, Hollywood and traditionally we focused on combat, and that's absolutely PTSD can result from that. But what we're seeing right now, this is the uncomfortable conversation, is military sexual trauma. That's an awkward one to talk about. People don't like to acknowledge these things happen, and people do, men and women, experience trauma from that. So it's very difficult to come forward, and it's very difficult to have those conversations. So these are things that we need to start to address in uncomfortable conversations.
Exactly. And it does, again, speak to the panelists here and just coming to such a forum and expressing and sharing this honest, transparent, and raw experience, because we do need to avoid the sugarcoating. We do need to avoid these Hollywood-esque type of analogies or images that we have become so accustomed to seeing as part of the military experience. While we do in the background know it's not an easy thing, and yes, we know that there are other issues, we don't really know the layers of how deep it actually goes. So it is important not only to have those conversations internally amongst the various service personnel, but it's also good for us on the outside, that are family members or friends, or even future colleagues to have a better understanding of how we can actively participate in those conversations in an effective and healthy way. So, Chris, I'm interested to see what your perspective is with regards to that question.
Yeah, Sean and Ashley touched on it quite well, as we have many parallels in the U.S. Armed Forces, not to be, not expected down here.
Right.
Talking with things is I particularly like Sean's example of talking about, the career path and what it can change. And I think that dissuades a lot of veterans and military members from actually seeking treatment, because some of the self-stigma that's there is like, am I going to be removed from military service because I'm seeking mental health care? As my security clearance, if you're in something that requires access to some special programs, is that going to be taken away? Are they going to take my firearms away from me? The man up, or the being macho mentality. I'm going to be seen as weak because I sought mental health care. That has a lot to do with it. Is there is fear that I go in and I speak to somebody, I'm going to be discharged from the military because I said a little bit too much about my experiences. Where Ashley talks about, there's this fine line between hero worship and the broken veteran narrative that's out there. And there's this stereotype over what is post-traumatic stress. Is at least the conversation here in the United States is it's all combat. There's all these resources. When she's even more correct. The majority of people who serve in the military, at least in the U.S. military, do not see direct combat. Some of the stress is coming from things that are happening at home, whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault, vehicular accidents can cause more post-traumatic stress than anything. Is we don't think of that as regards, because we want to throw the term combat out to everything, to where these, combat, if you look at it, for many, if you look at some of the studies that are being done, there is actually a protective factor for our military members, because you form this close connection. So we actually do more harm than good saying combat causes all these issues, when the reality is a lot of stuff that's happening in your home station environment is what's causing it. Financial strife, marital strife can be big parts of that as well too. And we're not having that real conversation around it, is we just throw combat at it and expect it to go there. And you're right about the resources. There was a large scandal here in the United States about the Veterans Affairs Department and the wait time for our veterans to seek mental health care. We discussed about 22 veterans dying a day by suicide. A lot of it comes down to access to care and resources being available. And I will tell you, from my perspective, being a post 9/11 vet, a lot of these data points come from prior generations. It's, as a post 9/11 vet, I have access to so many resources at my disposal. It's those veterans who came in prior to 9/11, that may have been your Vietnam generation or your Gulf War or your Cold War generation, that don't exactly have the resources they need. And, I grew up in Wisconsin, so there's some rural environments. I live in the state of Nevada now, where nothing but a desert, with the exception of Las Vegas and Reno. And I know Canada gets very rural. So where you find a veteran that's out there, like, what if they're trying to access care in Saskatchewan or some of these provinces that have not very major cities in them? How do we provide access to veterans who live in the more rural or frontier communities as well too?
Thank you. And again, while, yes, today's conversation is around veterans and military service personnel, it can go beyond that as well. There is so much overlap with regards to the importance of having conversation to help give that individual that is struggling with some form of a mental health issue or a mental health challenge an ear. And sometimes that's all that it takes is that support, to know that when I'm ready, or if I'm ready now, I have someone that will listen. Treatment and support, we've again sort of put in a neat and tidy box as to what that looks like, ignoring the fact that support goes well beyond what a professional can provide. While that's important and that can be valuable, it's not the only thing. And conversations like we have on our Real Talks is about educating individuals that may be listening now or afterwards, that they themselves can be that access of support. And it doesn't take letters behind the name or experiences within the military to be able to offer that. It's simply the fact that there are fallouts to certain experiences. There are, coping mechanisms that people may not have to better manage some of those life experiences that they've gone through. And that doesn't make them less than or more than. It just means that they're human. And as humans, we have a duty and a responsibility to, as well, in my opinion, a responsibility, and duty is what's imposed on you. Responsibility is what you choose to take upon yourself. So I look at it as, if you're human, it is your responsibility to be able to give another human being support. And that support is in the form of an ear, not judgment, but simply just listening. And that's not to say, again, that doesn't, take away from the fact that there may not be other supports available or accessible, and that not everyone is comfortable with speaking their truths, as we've already expressed, the uncomfortable conversations and how those need to happen. So do you think that still is one of the sole barriers to, either active duty service members or veterans, and how that may limit their willingness or readiness to actually access support? So yes, accessibility with regards to location is one factor for sure. And unfortunately, we can't achieve and move mountains after today on that. And though we can move mountains on other ways. So Ashley, I'm interested to see what you think with regards to that piece.
Thank you. When you're talking about demonstrating support as, family members, loved ones of somebody who has been in the military, I think it's important for people to understand that it doesn't really matter if that person served 1 year or 40 years. If they completed basic training and they were honorably discharged, they've served their country, they're a veteran. So very simply, the simple thing that you can do is tomorrow and other days, just say thank you for your service. It's an acknowledgement that they have provided a service for the country, that they've dedicated something beyond themselves. So I think that that's really important. And it's also important to understand that our police services, our firefighting services, our paramedics, 911 dispatchers, they're also serving. They're not serving abroad, but they're serving our community. And just to recognize that this type of service is difficult, and just simply to say thank you. Just, tomorrow's a great day to do it, but other days as well.
And that's the thing. I think we, again, there are these days of recognition, and they are important for us to all take a step back and remember. And though that remembrance and honoring of our service people should continue beyond. And again, it's a matter of ensuring that their experience, when they do return home, whenever that looks like, is to be as valued as their time abroad. And I know from personal experience, and I've shared a little bit about my story with each of you, it is challenging as a family member. I don't sugarcoat it, nor do I try to make the experiences all like potpourri and beautiful. It's not. It has its own challenges for us as family members, in the sense of what has been told to us with regards to the military personnel experience. So it, again, not only is about reducing the stigma and having that uncomfortable conversation, but as we've spoken throughout, is change the narrative around what that experience actually looks like. Yes, you do, and some do face very difficult times, and others don't. It doesn't lessen that these conversations need to happen to promote positive change around mental health. That is the overarching idea here, is how do we make the conversation around knowing that today is just not my day, and I'm just not having the greatest day today, as a natural conversation, as me saying, I've got a bit of a headache today, or my arm's like not feeling the best today. And that was like an old injury that I had playing baseball years ago, or just simply age. So, it does boil down to addressing the gaps of understanding. And we've sort of touched upon it throughout our conversation, but it's really important to appreciate that the experience of a service personnel isn't just about combat, as Chris pointed out. It is the pathway home. It is trying to find a new purpose once that sort of idea of what I was going to do with my life is now not something that I'm able to do. So I know that wasn't necessarily a question that I've posed before to you, but I am I'm really interested to see what your perspective is with regards to that invisible concept that some individuals do carry with regards to purpose. So, Sean, what do you think?
Oh, I think it's unbelievably important and applicable to everything you do. From a leadership perspective, I speak to my troops and I ask them, like, how are you doing today? And it's not from a point of, the young troops, of course, the young sailors, soldiers, and air persons, they're simply going to turn around and go, yeah, I had a couple beers last night, Chief. It was a great evening, right? That's the standard, typical response. And of course, the disparity in rank is they're not really comfortable opening up to me yet, right? So I have to take the initiative and press and press and press, right? And eventually they will understand that whatever they tell me, I'm not going to hold it against them. And when I'm working with my young troops, I need them to understand that when I'm asking this, it's twofold, right? It is because I'm generally curious and concerned. What did you do? The standard chief perspective is, am I going to hear from the police today? Were you downtown having too much fun, right? Or was it, hey, Chief, my new baby was up all night. I didn't sleep, and at the same time, that's going to help me prioritize the jobs that need to be done, right? Being a diver, perhaps I'm not going to take that young diver and ask him to go underneath the ship when I know he's only slept an hour the night before, right? Normally, young troops, they're not going to openly share anything that they would deem as a piece of weakness, right? And, as I will say, a modern leader, somebody who's in touch, right? Like it may be a little bit of emotional intelligence applied there, right? To understand that is not anything I'm going to hold against them. And I can prioritize how I want things to run within my department. But at the same time, if this young person needs help, I can push them to where they're going to need it. And that doesn't happen immediately. That kind of relationship will take time between the working troops and the leadership. So yeah, really, it's could be anything.
Great, thank you. Chris, what do you think?
Well, there's definitely 2 points I'd like to make in regards to this, and Sean, touches on it a lot. I fall back on a book, a very good one that inspires me, A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and in it he quotes Friedrich Nietzsche and says, it's something to the about if he who has a strong enough why can bear almost any how. And this is a man who survived the concentration camps and didn't know where his wife would have been at the time. And I hold true to that. Is within your own life, if you have a strong enough why, if you have a strong enough purpose, you can sustain almost any how. And I think as we all know is that's why some members join the armed services is a cause or a purpose that is bigger than themselves and get inspired by that, which encounter when people depart the military can really cause a lot of struggle that is in there, finding that new meaning and purpose in life. Where I like Sean and Ashley touching on is this companionship or companioning and the trust of the tribe, because that's really what it boils down to is trusting your other human being, is whoever's to your left or your right, no matter what they are, what ethnic background they come from, where they're at. It's just understanding that and really getting to know who you're associated with. And so the whole conversation on mental health and getting help boils down to trust. Do I trust that person that I'm speaking to? Do I trust this man or my woman to the left and my right to be able to be there for me? And can I be there for them? Can I build up this strong relationship just by listening to them and responding to them in a positive mean? Will they provide that relationship in regards? And part of that underlying of trust, provide help or assistance, is understanding the culture. Really having been finding that common ground out there. Don't just be like, okay, you're in the Canadian Air Forces. Okay, are you a pilot? Well, understanding that more jobs and career paths are out there besides aviation and some of these branches of services. Yeah. So have that real conversation, form that real, honestly, just sit down and talk and have that responding ear, and then that can go a long way. Because if you provide that active constructing, responding, and show interest, then when that person wants to discuss something difficult with you, they want to open up to you, they're more inclined to be able to do that because you've broken that ice and you've found that commonality and not stereotype or stigmatize them based upon their service. And it works out for us as well, too, no matter what environment. Ask those questions, understand it, understand what their person, where it's coming from, build that rapport and build that trust. And then you may see some changes in mental health that way.
And I'm listening to everything that's been said so far, and all I can sit back is going, this conversation is so similar to all the other conversations we've been having in our Real Talk, because it is across the board. We know that what works the best with regards to supporting and assisting someone that is struggling with a mental health challenge is trust, is conversation, and just being present in a non-judgmental way. And I always say you should be listening to understand someone, not to reply. It is about taking in what they are saying from their perspective and trying to understand it from their perspective, not your own. When you're trying to sort of navigate a conversation or even pick up on some cues non-verbally, you're doing it for your own purpose. Trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to approach this? How am I going to approach them? With simply just asking the question of, how are you doing? Allows the platform to be set on their ground, not yours. And so many aren't doing that. And again, it's just about trying to, yes, understand the culture that they're coming from, but also start a new culture to work off of. Because we only know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. And it's really important to be able to, again, chip away at that stigma, chip away at the discrimination, chip away at all of these barriers that do exist across the board, not just in the forces, but across society with regards to having those challenging conversations. So Ashley, what do you think with regards to that piece that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think that like listening is absolutely critical, as you're explaining. It's not always about asking questions and handing somebody a solution. Simply listening starts to create that bond of trust. And as Chris said, it's absolutely essential to military service, whether you are in combat or whether you're in Canada. You have to trust the person to your front, behind, left, right, and everything. And when you leave the military, that can be often lost for people without these types of transition services. And luckily in Canada and in the US as well, there's tons of those services available now. I'll give you an example that when I left in 2005, there were 0 services. There was absolutely nothing. There was no phone call. There was no see you later. There was no how are things going. And for me, I instantly lost my sense of purpose. I had gained a sense of purpose. I had gained a sense of drive in the military. And without that, I really felt alone and isolated. I was literally isolated, but without any sense of purpose. And it's taken me a long time to gain that. So I think, part of having that conversation with people is to realize that, somebody might be struggling when they leave the military, finding a sense of purpose. It's not simply, get another job, away you go, but finding a reason to go to that job and finding a reason to make it meaningful will have a significant impact on them.
And I think that goes with anyone, really, is when you have that sense of purpose, that sense of motivation, inspiration, and drive in what you are doing. That definitely helps to contribute to a more positive mental health outlook on the situation when things do come about. And again, it is looking at, what can we do? Not necessarily what has been done. And yes, we know that the past is in the past, and we've made some strides moving forward in lessening the stigma around that, in highlighting the importance of conversation. It has not changed the fact that we are not necessarily where we should be. And though we can't lessen where we are. So with that said, what can individuals outside of the military be able to do to help support that movement forward in a positive way? For that, I'm going to start with Sean.
Sure. I can speak to a few just ground roots initiatives that are happening here in just north of Toronto, right in Borden. We're an absolutely massive base, but we have a network of what we call honorary colonels, right?
Okay.
These are individuals who are paired up with the military command teams, but who are influential people within the community, right? So what happens is they create that bond between the base and the entities within the base and the surrounding communities. At the same time, it's, we share experiences, professionally from the civilian world as well as military, and they get to come and join us when we have military events and stuff. So it's something they may not have been exposed to. But that being said, they also set up and they understand the importance of supporting our veterans, right? There are all kinds of grassroots organizations that are developed within, I'll just say, Borden Central, that relate directly to the base and the veterans from this base and the veterans who live around this base. And that is simply a grassroots initiative. But I can tell you, hand on my heart, that every base in Canada has an organization like this. And people just need to understand, especially the leadership teams, the command teams, need to understand that these initiatives are probably not known by the young people and the people who need these services, right? Like when I was working in Ottawa at National Defense Headquarters, right, we would push out the information, and I'll tell you, 30 kilometers outside Ottawa, it somehow disappeared. I don't know, right? And when I talk to people here and I ask, did you know about this? And they're like, what do you mean? Is this a thing? And it's a communication piece, right? So to get the information out to the young people or the people who need the help, you must be constantly engaged if you are part of a leadership team. So communication and engagement is probably the most important piece of getting support to the people who need the support. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Chris, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Sometimes it's often we try to fit a square peg in a round hole, for some of things, is we want to run this checklist to have this single cookie, or I call it this cookie cutter solution for a lot of folks that are out here. Is like, okay, this is the only way it can be done, when realistically is we need to attune whatever care that they need to that individual, rather than making it for the masses. And Sean touches on some things here in the United States. Is our federal government through SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association, has partnered through then was signed into the Prevents Act, which is to get there and with veteran suicide in our major cities. And so a lot of cities and states, and even some towns that we have, like Buffalo, New York, per se, in the state of New York, come together to build this collaborative force of local communities, military installations, and how we can best fuse resources together to get the resources in hand, as Sean describes, for our members that live within these communities. And we experience some of the same things out here. Is once you get away from a military installation, some of those discussions go away. But we can tend to be a little bit closed off as well, too. The conversation I like to talk about, relates to combat a little bit, is downrange, is we talk about being inside the wire under this fortified type community. And our military tends to be close hold on a lot of information. We want to solve our issues internally, when actually the most success is getting outside the wire, partnering with those forces that understand the local climate and community and what's available in the community for resources, and building this partnership. So we build this cohesiveness, rather than closing those gates off to our community and taking it close hold. Because who's best to know about resources in the community than the community themselves providing those resources to our military installations? And we tend to not do that quite well here in the United States. There are some sectors of bright hope. There are a lot of grassroots movements that are out there. I'm a part of a few of them that talk about building peer support through mixed martial arts, peer support through a hockey foundation, to where military members come out and skate, and then you have a conversation afterwards. It's about finding those things that work best for those individuals within the community that they live in.
Wonderful. And again, it brings it down to options as well. Quite often when it comes to mental health supports, or even just being able to address various mental health issues, we become so ingrained to believe that there's this one way of doing it, right? And that's it. And once you start sort of working towards that one fit model, or I call it also the tunnel vision of support, in that's the end game right there, you miss opportunities that can be so valuable. And that is why conversations like this need to continue to build that awareness that there are options, and that option may not look the way that you think it's going to, but it can be as effective as to what you are wanting it to be like. So Ashley, what do you think with regards to that?
Thank you. I'll touch a bit on what Chris was talking about, like in the time of the community that we live in. For example, here in Kingston, I've seen a lot of significant changes at CFB Kingston over the last few years. It used to have its own public school. It used to be a thriving base where families would, stay and live pretty isolated on that base together. Now, I don't think that school exists. And more often, people are living off base. So, kids are in military kids. They're no longer, I'm not sure if you can still use the term base brats anymore, because they're not living just on the base. They're in local public schools, that kind of thing. So just an awareness. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So more and more often military members are more within the community and not isolated off to the base. And one thing I also wanted to touch on is we're really talking about the individual effects of mental health issues, but I just want to address that it's also, military is a family. Your family is very often serving along with you. So whether you're deployed for months at a time, your kids don't see you for a couple of years, or you're dropping everything because of a local emergency, your family is in this together with you. So just an acknowledgement that it's just not that one individual, but their spouse or their children may be experiencing some of the same types of challenges.
Yeah. And that's where it gets really hard, because it's not to take away again from the experience of our service personnel and the layers of experiences and challenges that is faced. It is, though, the domino effect, right? And the sphere of influence, that regardless of what sector you work in, we all have a sphere of influence in our mental health, and where our heads are at and how strong our minds are at, are going to impact that sphere of influence, whether we want it to or whether we try really hard for it not to. So when we're looking at supports and when we're looking at having these conversations, it's again looking at it from the perspective of, how can I make this an open, honest dialogue and forum to be able to share that experience, but also hear the experience of someone else? Now, before we get into like the last few questions that I do invite those that are listening to us live to pose any questions that you may have for our panelists, and we'll take it from there. But what I am hoping to do before we get into some of those questions that may come in is, and I'm just going to throw this out there because I didn't prepare you guys for this one, so beware. Now, we don't necessarily know who is listening to us. And though what we do know is that regardless of what uniform you wear, and regardless of what badge you carry, and regardless of what sector you've chosen to take on, or even if you are simply a student that is listening to us right now, we all have mental health, and we are all impacted by the experiences that we have. But I also look at the experiences of someone else can actually be a learning tool and a tool of inspiration to build off of. And whether that be providing motivation or simply that security of knowing that someone else understands can be quite loud and powerful. So if I was to ask each of you, not knowing who is on the other side of this screen, but provide one message of education or one message of inspiration, what would that message be? So if I'll give you a little bit of time to think about that, because I know I just kind of threw that out there. It's more of like, I'm truly blessed to have each of you share as willingly your experiences. And I just think that we can continue that learning moving forward. So, okay, Sean, you're ready for it. Okay.
Through my experience and obviously going through the organization for the last 27 years, it's really learning the difference between empathy and sympathy and how to apply them day to day, right? I try not to sympathize, but I will empathize, or I will do my best to empathize. That way I can see where somebody's coming from and I can help them get to where they want to be, right? So learn the difference between empathy and sympathy and how you apply it. So really,
Well
that's
done.
the biggest take. Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. Ashley?
Well, as soon as you said a message on education, I can speak to that. So for if there's students listening to this, I think I've gone to in one way or another something around 15 different post-secondary institutions throughout my academic career, all across Canada, and about 80% of that was done online. So I really appreciate what people are going through with COVID and how isolating that might feel to them. Totally get it. It is really, really difficult. So my advice, just want to let students know there are an absolute ton of resources out there within your educational institution that are there to support you. People want you to succeed. People are not trying intentionally to go out and fail you and create a barrier for you. There's absolutely, I've got a couple messages. There's absolutely no harm in asking about something that you think you may or may not need. It doesn't matter. Find a resource before you might even need it. And finally, be your own advocate. No one is going to hand this stuff to you as far as mental health resources. You've got to look, you've got to push for yourself. If you don't get the answer that you want the first time, you might have to ask a second time, sometimes a third or fourth time. So just keep pushing and know that you're not in this alone.
Thank you. We also have, just before we go to Chris, we have put in the comment section of our live various services, not only for our veteran population and community members and families, but also our student population and general population as well. So if you need support, there are supports available to you. So please check those out, and they will be available 24/7. So Chris, what do you think? What are you going to leave us with regards to inspiration, motivation, or education?
Yeah, I mean, I like that you posted the resources in there. As somebody that's used some resources here in the United States, is don't be afraid to do it. Is they're there to help. This is somebody that is unbiased that will listen to you and discuss things. Whether you want to send it through a text message, a video chat, over the phone, or whatever, send a message through your favorite social media platform. As there's going to be somebody on the other side that's going to have that empathy, that's going to listen and validate what you're going through. By more means is we think we're going through this experience in life alone. I'm the only one struggling with this. I will tell you that is not the truth. Is you're going to find more commonality that you are not alone in this fight. It is okay and healthy to share your experience of what you are going through, whether it be a struggle in the armed forces, whether it be a struggle in life, is any struggle that you may be finding with that, the stressor in there. Don't keep it inside. Do not isolate. Get out there and discuss this with somebody else, because it is worth it. You are not alone in the struggle. And for those being out there, is the best way you can do it, besides listening, to quote one of my favorite movies of all time, Bill and Ted, be excellent to each other. The more kind and awesome you can be to each other and fellow human, is just being excellent to one another and treating everybody else the way that you feel to be treated through positive excellence will go a long way.
Now, how do I follow that? Thank you. And again, it is everything and then some with regards to what can be done. And it is about stepping outside of our own comfort zones to have those conversations, but also be able to step out of our comfort zones to receive that information and stories as well. So together we can work towards sustainable and meaningful change, ensuring that those that do need support have support, and that there is absolutely no shame in asking for help. It is important for us all to keep the conversation going, regardless of how difficult the conversation may be. So on this Veterans and Remembrance Day, by all means, please, let's thank veterans. Let's thank our service personnel for their service. But perhaps we can also challenge ourselves to go further and do service on our own, Service on behalf of others. Who knows? What opportunities might arise to actually make a good catch and contribute to that change we all want to see. I do want to extend a very heartfelt special thank you to all of my panelists today who have joined us. Their contribution has left us being better informed and educated on what it all takes to support each other, while also inspiring, motivating, and encouraging us to do our part. Thank you all for joining us, and stay safe.